Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder, to the full ship review on the SMS Derfflinger. And first of all, apologies for taking so long in making this video, but I played the Derfflinger so much that I researched the Derfflinger by playing the Derfflinger, and that was only possible due to a 30-day test drive from Gaijin. So thank you guys at the Gaijin CC team. And also thank you and shout out to my good friend .excel, which took his sweet time helping me with the Excel spreadsheets, with the comparison graphs and so forth. And also thank you Drachinifel again for allowing me to use your 5-minute guide on the historical career of the SMS Derfflinger. And I also have a lot of background footage for you to see how the ship actually performs. It's not just one of the most beautiful World War I ships in the game that we have. It also is one with a rich history, and also in War Thunder it just fits in very nicely. So it has this beautiful shape. It has center-lined main battery of 12 inches of gun caliber, 20-second reload, really sturdy armor, and you know,
I like my playthings extra durable.
And if you look into the tech tree, it's not the first ship that we have in the German tech tree that sits at 6.3. All of them have a battle rating of 6.3, and all of them have 11 or 12-inch guns with a 20-second reload. It is a worthy successor to the SMS Vondertan and a worthy predecessor to the monster that still is the Scharnhorst. And honestly, due to it having a rather high speed, it actually can work really well in long games and just drive the enemies nuts. This ship, together with the game mechanics, works really well, and it was a joy to play. So, without further ado, I hope you have your favorite beverage ready and your snacks, because here we go. First of all, we have Drachinifel's 5-minute guide, link in the description down below. Then we have a lot of statistics and in the background some good footage. I hope you enjoy.
The Derfflinger class was the largest class of German battlecruisers ever built, and represented a major change and improvement in the design of these ships for the High Seas Fleet. Prior to the class, the German battlecruiser designs up until this time, Von der Tann, Moltke, Goeben and Seydlitz, had possessed two common features which the Navy had now decided needed changing. These were an 11-inch main battery and staggered wing turrets. Although a degree of cross-deck firing was possible, depending on the ship, it meant that the latter three ships' practical broadside was usually 8 guns, despite carrying 10 guns in 5 turrets. On Von der Tann, the lack of a second rear turret limited the ship still further, with the usual 6-gun broadside whilst carrying 8, similar to the Invincible class. Whilst this might have been fine against the Invincibles themselves and their follow-up subclass, the British had now escalated with the Lion class, which were better protected and armed with 8 13.5-inch guns all on the centre line. And their battleships, which German battlecruisers were also supposed to be able to face in a fleet engagement, were getting thicker and thicker armour, as well as more firepower as well. Funded by the 4th Naval Law, the 3 ships of the class were designed to fill the allocated new 3 Dreadnought slots, although design work had actually started before the law was passed. And in a manner similar to many Reichsmarine and Kriegsmarine vessels later down the line, the Germans would modify the design of each ship whilst they were under construction, resulting in each one coming out slightly different to the previous one. This was largely because their construction was staggered out over a couple of years, as opposed to the more rapid British practice down an entire class within a few months of each other. So for Germany, advances in naval technology would be present by the time later ships of a class were laid down, and so tinkering was always going to result. The 3 ships would be named Derfflinger, Lützow and Hindenburg, all of whom were generals, one from the 30 Years' War about half a millennia earlier, the next from the Napoleonic Wars, and the last after a general who was still very much alive and had only recently become famous. Before we go any further, I'd just like to say a quick shout out and thank you to subscriber Speedbird, who supplied a number of photos of their most excellent model of Derfflinger, which you will see during the process of this video. As a result of the firepower and turret layout concerns mentioned earlier, the main battery of this class was increased to 12-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, for a grand total of 8 guns in the main battery. A pair of turrets superfiring forward, and a pair of turrets aft in near superfiring positions. This gave the same 8-gun broadside as previous classes, without the need for a 5th turret, saving substantially on weight, thus compensating for the increase in gun size. Hindenburg would have slightly different mountings to the first 2 ships. Initially, these guns could elevate to just over 13 degrees, which limited their range to well below that of their British rivals, and so this was modified to a 16-degree elevation in 1916, which added just over 2,000 yards to the overall range. Secondary armament consisted of 14 casement-mounted 5.9-inch guns, mounted in the superstructure rather than the hull, and thus a little more serviceable than most casement-mounted secondary batteries. Emergency fittings of anti-roll tanks on Derfflinger after trials meant that 2 of them had to be removed, but the other 2 ships in the class would carry the designated number, and, like the main armament, their range would be extended during the ship's careers. A number of anti-surface and anti-air 88mm guns were also carried, starting out with 8 of the former and 4 of the latter, with the precise layouts and numbers differing by ship and by time as their careers progressed. 4 underwater torpedo tubes rounded out the armament, 1 pointing in each direction, although again with some differences. Lutzow and Hindenburg would carry larger diameter tubes than Derfflinger. This particular design feature would come back to bite them later. Armour was kept broadly the same as Seydlitz in both layout and thickness, at a 12-inch belt. Unlike previous battlecruisers, the ships were planned to only have 3 shafts instead of 4, in order to allow the central shaft to use a diesel engine. But since the diesel engine turned out to not be ready for service by the time the ships were ordered, they reverted back to the traditional 4-shaft steam turbine arrangement. The engines would use a mixture of coal and oil-fired boilers to produce about 62,000 shaft horsepower for a maximum speed of 26.5 knots, at least in theory. All the ship's power plants would well exceed their shaft horsepower target, and their trial speeds also varied wildly. Derfflinger was actually a knot slower than designed. Lutzow hit the mark, and Hindenburg reached about the same speed as Lutzow, despite being designed for about half a knot more speed. Other differences in the ships included their length, with Hindenburg being a whole 1 foot and 3 inches longer than the other 2. Lutzow and Hindenburg had 17 watertight compartments as opposed to Derfflinger's 16, and Derfflinger needed anti-roll tanks fitted after some rather alarming lists developed during high-speed turns, as we indicated earlier. Thus, when you combine all these small changes, each ship was pretty unique, despite ostensibly being all of the same class. 2 of the ships were laid down in 1912, with Hindenburg following in 1913. Derfflinger commissioned into the fleet in September 1914, Lutzow in August 1915, and Hindenburg in May 1917. This extended period reflecting the delays caused to German ship construction during World War I. Hindenburg would have a relatively short career, only actually becoming fully operational in October 1917. She would only take part in 2 abortive missions of any significance before ending up in Scapa Flow at the end of the war. But it was actually Lutzow who would be the shortest lived. She only became fully operational in March 1916, thanks to engine damage sustained on trials after commissioning. She then took part in the bombardment of Yarmouth the next month, and became flagship of the first scouting group after Seydlitz ran into mines on the way home. At the end of May, not quite 3 months into her operational life, she led the first scouting group at the Battle of Jutland. Initially, things went very well, with Lutzow generally getting the better of her duel with HMS Lion and knocking out the latter ship's amidships turret. Later, she would also take part in the destruction of the armoured cruiser Defence, the crippling of the armoured cruiser Warrior, and the general engagement of various British ships. However, about 20 minutes after her engagement with the armoured cruisers, she would encounter the old battlecruisers of 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron, fresh from gunnery practice at Scapa Flow. Lutzow and Derfflinger would combine fire to annihilate the first ever battlecruiser, HMS Invincible, but not before Invincible landed quite a number of 12-inch hits of her own on Lutzow. The large open area needed for the forward torpedo tube and its loading arrangements was amongst the compartments opened to the sea by 2 of these hits, which hit the bow below the waterline, and the ship began to take on substantial amounts of water. With her pumps being unable to keep up, after taking further above water hits from other ships, the Lutzow withdrew. However, within hours the ship was no longer safe to sail forwards, and an attempt to reverse her way home was thwarted when the bow became so flooded that first the ship's stern, and then both the screws and the rudder, began to rise out of the water. With it fairly clear that the ship was now doomed, the escorting torpedo boats took off the surviving crew, and torpedo boat G-38 hastened her fate with its own weapons. Thus, in one of the often missed subtle ironies of Jutland, the oldest and newest battlecruisers present on the day ended up sinking each other. But in keeping with a recurring theme amongst German ships, where one of the class seems to absorb all the luck at the expense of the others, Derfflinger's story was to be quite different. Although, like Lutzow, she suffered engine damage on trials, she would be in fleet service by November 1914, taking part in the raids on Scarborough, Hartlepool and Whitby at the end of the year, and then taking part in the Battle of Dogger Bank at the start of 1915. In return for a single hit from a British 13.5-inch shell, she heavily damaged HMS Lion, a ship that didn't really seem to have that much luck when it came to engaging ships of the Derfflinger class. Repairs and other issues with the engines kept the ship in dock for most of the rest of 1915, and her next major mission would be joining Lutzow and the rest of the first scouting group that was available for the Yarmouth raid. At Jutland, she would have incredible luck, both good and bad. Behind Lutzow, she was engaged with the British battlecruisers, and would combine with Seydlitz to sink HMS Queen Mary, and combine with Lutzow, as mentioned earlier, to deal with Invincible, along with contributing to the destruction of HMS Defence. Although initially not engaged by the British due to signalling errors on the part of who else but Beatty and Seymour, she would eventually come under fire and take hits from something in the order of 20 large shells, reports vary, at various points in the battle, including 15-inch shells from the 5th Battle Squadron. This, as you might imagine, took a rather significant toll, at one point knocking out all her main guns, although one of the turrets would later be brought back into action. First Scouting Group being saved from vengeful British battlecruisers late in the engagement by the old pre-dreadnoughts that were tagging along with the High Seas fleet. Nevertheless, the tremendous battering that the ship had sustained, along with its tenacity and undoubted lethality in combat, led to the ship receiving the nickname Iron Dog, a thoroughly deserved reputation. Her operational history past this point, once repairs were complete, was similar to Hindenburg's, and both ships would be interned in Scapa Flow at the end of the war. Both ships would successfully scuttle themselves in June 1919, with Hindenburg eventually raised and scrapped in 1930. Iron Dog, meanwhile, would stay hidden for much longer, Only being raised in 1939, her scrapping was then interrupted by World War II, and she would only go to the breaker's yard in 1946. Both ships' bells would be recovered during the salvage efforts and would be presented to the West German Navy a couple of decades later.
In War Thunder, the ship is equipped with a distributed armor scheme, and we have the main belt at the waterline of 300mm rolled cemented armor. Below this, below the waterline, we have 200mm, 250mm of rolled cemented armor, and above this we have a big strip of 260mm of rolled cemented armor. We have the bow section ranging from 100mm to 120mm, with a 50mm plating at the waterline. Then we have the bulkheads at the front, which are a bit mixed. We range from 200 to 250mm, and then the rounded barbette of 260mm. So that's not really great, but it's good enough in most cases. And in the rear we have then also 250 to 200mm of armor. The barbettes are 260mm. At closer ranges they can get pierced even by heavy cruisers, but overall, you know, there are not really that many ships in War Thunder at all that have a safe barbette. And the turret faces are 270mm. They are in places rounded, and even between the barrels we have a 22 degrees constructional armor slope angle. And we have then also a deck plating of 25, 30, 40, 50mm in places, but the magic comes behind the first layer of armor, because we have a 50mm turtleback, which is at a 58 degrees constructional armor slope angle, which is great. And in the middle of the ship it's also held by some coal bunkers, but where the frontal firing group is and the rear firing group, you do not have that luxury compared to German battleships. So that also, together with some 30mm internal bulkheads, kind of gets you to see that this ship is really durable and has a lot of armor plates that can decap the shells, that can reduce their penetration, especially if you angle the ship. You have great firing arcs, and especially if you kite away the ship, together with screwing up the enemy player's aim, and then the thicker effective armor can really keep you alive for quite a while. The X-ray reveals that we have the magazines below the waterline, but the shells are actually at the waterline or slightly above, and they can get hit, ignited, and then, while it is not a full magazine detonation, you have no more shells to shoot, whereas then the propellant charges are much lower in the ship and can only be reached with some freak shells or with plunging fire at extreme ranges. So hence your deck armor being not that great is a weakness, but you know, it's a World War I design, and when you're fighting 15 kilometers, those keys or amagis, you know, you're not in the best positions to begin with. So now we can have some comparison Excel spreadsheets. I hope you further enjoy those. Now let's start the statistics feast with a comparison spreadsheet on the main battery, and for the SMS Derfflinger we have 8 12-inch or 305mm-50 SK L-50 guns, and that looks like you have the joint lowest amount of guns, and there are a lot of ships that have 12 guns, but the effective broadside is reduced on ships like the Kirby and the IGN Setsu due to wing turret layout. And then what is actually worst in class is the ammunition amount, with only 680 rounds of total main battery shells, giving you only 85 rounds per barrel. What is best in class though, by quite a bit, is the 20-second reload, only 2/3 of what the most other ships have to deal with. and that results in the joint highest DPM of 24 rounds per minute, together with the Ardentanti Alighieri, which has 50% more guns. However, if you take into account the penalty mechanics in War Thunder, when you shoot while your barbette is damaged and or you repair while firing, the reload gets significantly higher. But thanks to this relatively low reload, you can still be quite competitive, even when your enemies or opponents, for example in a 1 versus 1, are not yet damaged. In return, that means if you take out the barbettes over and over again of enemies, then they have a significantly reduced rate of fire in comparison to you, and also you can keep them in the endless rotation of having to extinguish the fire, having to repair the barbettes, and that is just awful to experience when you are on the wrong side of those guns. Then we have a rather slow turret rotation speed, especially if you're used to relatively modern cruisers or higher battle rating battle cruisers and battleships, but it's quite in the average. Then we have 5 degrees of gun depression and 16 degrees of gun elevation, which in theory limits your range, but in practice it doesn't in War Thunder. The elevation speed is also quite average with 4 degrees per second. Now let's focus on the torpedoes and some ship statistics, and we have the G7 torpedoes in a caliber of 500 millimeters, and they're almost usable. You have 12 torpedoes overall and 3 per side. You have 1 bow mounted and 1 stern mounted fixed torpedo tube and 1 torpedo tube fixed mounted to each side. So overall 3 torpedoes per side, if you will. And without the torpedo mode, in this case, you have 9.3 kilometers range with a speed of 50 kilometers per hour, and your warhead in this comparison is head and shoulders above everyone else's torpedoes, because they're all World War I vintage. But with 249.6 kilograms, you're 400 grams short of the 250 kilogram anti-torpedo bulkheads that can be found on heavy cruisers and modern battleships. What a shame. So that's some odd statistics. And we have a displacement of 31,200 tons. That is just a bit lighter than the HMS Queen Mary, with which you share the top speed of 52 kilometers per hour, which is rather nice, and you have a rather high crew count, but not the highest. Now let's talk about the secondary shells, and we have a reload of 8.6 seconds for the 150 millimeter or 5.9 inch guns, so they are on the higher end of caliber, and you have effectively 6 per side, but on the some angling you have 4, and on the extreme angles you have only 2 or 1 gun available, but again on the extreme angles. The APHE has the highest penetration, not just only at rather short distance of 240 millimeters, but also at 10 kilometers with 138 millimeters. We have 990 grams of TNT and 835 meters per second muzzle velocity. The HE isn't really that great, especially in comparison to the IGN Setsu's 6-inch guns, and with 21 millimeters you do not really win any contest. However, we have this category called special shells. Mostly it's either flak shells, or in this case it's all SAP rounds, and here we have a reduced penetration of only 95 millimeters and only 35 millimeters at 10 kilometers, but currently there seems to be a bug, and you can see it in the footage or in the background footage in some cases, where the secondary SAP rounds knock out the barbette of heavy cruisers, battle cruisers and battleships, where they have no business going through. And so also with these shells. It's a bug, it's not a feature, and usually you would be better off to use the APHE round, and you know, you do not have that much more TNT equivalent bursting charge. let's start the last part of the comparison, which is about the main battery ammunition, with the stock HE shell, the 305mm Sprenggranate L3,8 Bodenzünder. It's a high explosive with base fuse, whereas all other shells in this comparison are with a nose fuse, so they explode on impact. This shell penetrates a little bit and then goes off just when it's barely in the ship. And in War Thunder, this you really feel when you fire the shell at lightly protected light cruisers or destroyers. But it kind of lacks a little bit the yield. It only has 27 kilograms of TNT, making it the lowest yield for any TNT shell. And yeah, you really feel a difference when you fire the nose fuse high explosive shells from the Imperatrice Maria or the HMS Queen Mary, which has, with its 88 kilograms, the highest yield so far for any high explosive shell on any battleship or battle cruisers, including those with 14, 15 and even 16.1 inches. So this is quite the hammer that you fire with the HMS Queen Mary. But again, you have the advantage that it penetrates a little bit into the ship, yet it is my least favorite shell on the SMS Derfflinger. Already much better in performance is the 305mm Sprenggranate L3,3 semi-armor piercing. Okay, that is a bit of English in the German description. And that has only 10.8 kilograms of TNT for a mass velocity of 850 meters per second, so slightly slower than the base use high explosive. But it has an unusually high penetration for a SAP round with 483. And the yield is really low. It's actually lower than the AP, to which we'll come in just a moment. Yet it seems to really punish those cruisers, and due to how it works, and this is not really visible on the stat card, I think especially on cruisers I get much less over penetration than with the AP round. But most of the time you're better off using the AP, to which we will come now. Last but not least, we get to the tier 2 upgrade, which is the 305mm Panzersprengranate L3,4, which is an APC round, not an APCBC round. And we have 855 meters per second mass velocity and a 13.6 kilogram heavy warhead, which is quite average. Penetration wise, and this is why you watch my channel from time to time, is the penetration starting with 521 millimeters at 1000 meters, going down to 337 millimeters at 10 kilometers. And that sits quite in the middle of the pack, especially at range. We are head and shoulders above this sad penetration characteristics that is the Courbet's 12-inch AP, and we are literally dwarfed by whatever dark magic the Italians unleashed with the Arendante Alighieri's 12-inch AP round, which easily can punch through a lot of ships even at higher battle ratings. Talking about higher battle ratings, there the AP just isn't good enough to deal with US standards at range, to deal with really well angled ships that have overall strong armor. But even then, when you can shorten the distance, or that they don't take you serious and angle up against somebody else and give you flat broadside, then you can punish them. Then you can, due to your high DPM, eventually get a shell to connect, hit the flat part of the barbette, hit the weak spot in the turret face, hit the any sort of weak spot in the armor, and eventually deal damage, and keeping them burning, keeping them damaged due to your high DPM, and eventually killing them. It's great for a 1 versus 1, but again, the ship does not fare well when in a crossfire, as you would expect, but it might just hold up long enough to kill 1 or 2 of your opponents. So this has been the analytical part about the SMS Derfflinger so far, all in under 30 minutes, which is quite the achievement if you think about all the numbers, statistics, drachinifel's quote-unquote 5-minute guide and the introduction, the gameplay and everything. That is quite the achievement, and I hope that you honor it with a like. Subscribe if you want to see more of this. Let me know in the comment section down below if you enjoyed this, if it was not good enough, if you want to see even more data, if you want to see a different layout, because, you know, on screen there is quite a lot of stuff going on at the same time. Just let me know, and that motivates me to make more such videos. If nobody bothers to like this video, subscribe, and also share it with their friends, clanmates, and so forth, then it's too much effort for making it for just a couple of hundred of guys. I love you all, every single one of you, and especially you 3 naval players, but you know, it's quite time intensive and not my major income, let's put it that way. So if you really want to motivate me, subscribe, like, share, you name it, and also let me know what you think about it. Okay, here comes the summary. I love the Derfflinger. I expected a lot when this ship was announced, and it actually passed my expectation. It is a fun ship to play. It's a gorgeous looking ship, probably one of the best looking World War I era ships out there, including ships like the Congo, etc., or, you know, those dreadnoughty looking ships like the Kaiser class, the Bayern class. This ship is just style. It's just style. It's pure style, and I love it. The performance is absolutely great. You can hold yourself. It's not a foolproof ship, but it lets you forgive a mistake here and there. It is quite versatile, and again, it's the armor layout, the combination of the distributed armor scheme with the relatively thick belt for a battlecruiser, the very well constructed turtleback, you know, the 50mm stick, and very, very shallow, and also that you have 4 turrets, 8 guns, 20 seconds reload, and then the average shell lets you feel like you have a really good shell. So it just adds up to a really nice ship, and it is in a lineup that just is fantastic. You know, you have so many ships at rank 5 for the Germans that are 6.3. It's fantastic. So that's it for me today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Again, please subscribe if you haven't already. Give this video a like if you did. Let me know in the comment section if you like those extensive guides, if you want to see more of them, what ship you would want to see such a review that I haven't already made. So please look through my playlists and through my first impressions, through my naval reviews, and we will see each other on the battlefields, in the skies, and on the waves of War Thunder.